Okay, so welcome back to Helpful Teaching Tips Part 3. And we got a number of things to go through here. I'm back in my library. I thought I'd change venues for you to kind of give you a little bit something different to look at with what I got going on here. And I'm hoping that this wisdom from my library comes into through osmosis into my, to my head and out through the computer to you as well. So let's begin. We're on page 178, the bottom of page 178, in case you're wondering. And we begin with this one here, number 27. We go first class. This is an expression that I heard from my mom growing up. Moms have a lot of great wisdom. Mine sure did. Mine had an expression. She says this. She goes, "We go first class, or we don't go at all." And I got to tell you, there were times we didn't go at all. But what she really meant was not about traveling. What she meant was how to do things with integrity. And I'd like to impart upon you that when you put together presentations or coaching sessions or counseling sessions, whatever you want to call this, that you do it with integrity. If you go into it with a fear-based mentality, that is going to permeate everything else that goes along there. So first class says we're gonna do it right. We're gonna do it with integrity. And that's really what this comes down to. So for example, I could have actually, when I sent these workbooks out, I could have photocopied these things with black and white covers, but I didn't. I went with color because that's first class. In your care packets, I have sent all kinds of things. I'll describe those in a little bit as we go through here, but I didn't have to do that, but I wanted to because that's first class. So I want you to think to yourself about how you're going to do things first class. And again, if you see things as an expense and they mount up and you think, oh my God, I can't afford this. Now, in some cases, maybe you can't, but if you're going into it fear-based, I would rather have you think of everything as an investment as opposed to an expense, because investment means you're going to reap back rewards, and the people who you're teaching to will also reap back those rewards as well. Number 28 says, learn the art of journal writing. I've been a big fan of journaling for quite some time. I forgot to bring my own journal to show you, but it's a nice leather-bound journal. I've got like, about 10 of these things here. I'm a real big fan of this, and it turns out that I first learned this through a friend of mine named Mimi Farrelly. She teaches at the Naropa Institute. And when I first began to get involved was when I saw what she did. She actually walked into a workshop with a basket of seashells, and she said, we're gonna do some journaling. And turns out gave everyone a seashell and did some journaling based on the book A Gift from the Sea by Anne-Marie Lindbergh. I was actually at a women's retreat. The person who's going to teach stress management wasn't anywhere to be seen, so they asked me to come in. I think she was sick. And when I was leaving, I saw Mimi walk in with this basket of shells, and I thought to myself, wow, what is that? That's great. We don't have seashells in Colorado, so I was intrigued. And afterwards, I asked her, and she goes, well, we were doing journaling. So when I was at the University of Maryland, dumped into this class halfway through, I did the same thing. I went out and bought some seashells, put them on a beach table, a beach blanket, and then had people wrote up a little theme for journaling, which is in your workbook, and then we actually use that as a vehicle for self-exploration. So you have in your possession a stone. This is actually a tumble stone, and that's because after the seashell went so well, students would say, this is great, what do we do next time? So I was out looking for ideas. I came across at a trade show these wonderful tumble stones, and I thought this is a great metaphor for going through life, that we go through life with a lot of tough experiences that polish our rough edges. If we learn from the experience, it polishes our rough edges. And I passed this out when I gave the journal theme called the Vision Quest. And of course, the students all wanted to keep their stones. And we now know the idea of a worry stone, but this is the idea behind that. But it's something tactile. It's an idea of tactile touch. I also did a journal theme called You Are a Piece of the Puzzle. It's a great company called Liberty Puzzles, and they actually have these pieces of puzzles in the store to walk out with. So I gathered a whole mess of them, and I sent you a couple of these, or one or two of these. Each person's got one or two of these. Pretty cool. They're made of wood. Liberty Puzzles, if you're looking for a great icebreaker, is a great idea there. And then let's see. You may also notice that in your care package there is a real nice onyx stone too. And this is the idea of something for your own stress management survival kit that we talked about earlier and we'll come back to. So I got something for your homework assignment there. But this is a seashell, one of the ones I bought at Pier 1 Imports. You can buy seashells now online, so you can get them anywhere. I often say that I got these seashells from the beaches of Maryland and Virginia and Hawaii and Pier 1 Imports. It always gets a laugh. So journaling is not for everybody. I'll be the first to admit that, but it is a great way to get your thoughts on paper. There's a whole chapter of this in the textbook, and we're going to do this as a journal theme. You're going to also see in your care package there is a deck of cards called the Doors of Perception. We'll talk more about that later. But anyway, you've got lots of options for journaling, and I can tell you right now, I've had people say to me, "Wow, this journaling experience was more valuable than 3 years of therapy." I've heard that several times. And of course, what I think to myself is it's not more valuable, it's the culmination of 3 years of therapy. But I can tell you right now that all of these different techniques are like keys that open up the door to your heart. And journaling works for a lot of people that way. In fact, my first book was a book about journal themes, which then got turned into the textbook there. So what I typically do, and we'll talk more about this when we do this, is I have this as an experiential, and it's pretty cool. All right. Number 29 says, get in the habit of meditating daily. This is something that I've been suggesting for decades, but now with the world we're living in and the pandemic and post-pandemic times, I'm a really big fan of the fact that we need to take time to clear our mind out every day. So if you teach meditation, you had better be practicing it, because if you teach it and someone says to you, do you meditate? And you say no, you've just lost credibility. So get in the habit of doing it every day. And I would say start in the morning. That's what people suggest to do it. It's really a good time. Although whatever works for you is great. But I teach it, and we're going to do this as part of our experience too. We teach it so that we start with 5-minute increments. It's something real simple, and then move on to a bigger time. I'm going to tell you 2 stories about meditation, which I think might be of interest. One is that I used to swim in high school and college, and when your face is down in the water for 2 hours at a time swimming, that's meditation. I mean, you're not talking with anybody, so your mind's kind of like using the pool as your screen there, and kind of like just making sense of things. And I thought that this was a great form of meditation. I've been swimming ever since then. But I began to actually sit in the lotus position with the hands like this, doing the breathing about 35 years ago. And I can tell you right now, that's a different form of meditation. When you're doing nothing, then you really quiet the mind. And that's what we want to try and do here, is when you're moving, it is a form of meditation, but it's a little bit different. So, so we live in a world of distractions. There's no doubt about this. And distractions are actually coming at us with a vengeance. And so with this whole digital toxicity thing, that's also a part of it too. And I can't recommend enough that you practice meditating on a regular basis. This is going to be so essential to keep you grounded in these times of change. More on that as we do the session on meditation. Number 30 says, make a habit of using great quotes. I think we've already actually done this in the slide presentation, but I'll just show you a couple that are some of my favorites. Now, every quote in the opening of every chapter in the book is one that I picked out. And I got to tell you right now that the textbook companies are getting kind of paranoid about this, because everybody wants a piece of action with intellectual property. So some of the quotes I have in there, I can't use anymore. They won't be in the 10th edition of the textbook, like the one from Maria von Trapp or Carl Jung or Einstein. Everybody wants a piece of their intellectual property. So, so some of the quotes are now in a safe distance. We're actually using things from Plato and Socrates, and people have been dead for 2,000 years who aren't going to be asking for copyrights. In terms of this, what I was taught was that if you're doing something for teaching purposes, you can use it without asking permission. However, since there's an exchange of money going on for royalties with a book, then it's a different story. But you don't have to worry about that. I do, you don't. But it turns out that the use of quotes, as I mentioned earlier, it does a couple things. One is it helps segue from content to content. It's a nice way to do it very gracefully. They can be very inspirational. They can also make a point better than we can make. because of their expertise, and that's when we fall back to using experts to gain credibility. So here are some examples of some quotes that I like. This is Einstein: "No problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it." A classic quote, and it definitely states a really good premise there, that you have to have a different mindset, a different reframing, if you will. How about this one, Lily Tomlin? She goes, "If you're looking for fast acting relief, try slowing down." She's brilliant. And here's one quote I use a lot with Mark Twain. It says, "I'm an old man now, and I have known a great many problems in my life, ... most of which never happened." By the way, that is not a picture of Mark Twain. That's a picture of my great-great-grandfather. But a lot of people look like Mark Twain back in that day and time, so I stuck him in there just because I thought I'd have some legacy to my slide presentations there. Okay, so I would suggest that you try and find some really good quotes in the course of what you do. And there's a really good book by, what's his name? Alan Klein, called Winning Words. And nowadays, God, anybody can find great quotes. You know, it used to be that you go to some of these books like I have behind me and look and see if they had quotes that open up the chapters. And that's not a bad place to start, not a bad idea. But it turns out that now you can just Google quotes on nutrition, quotes on meditation, quotes on nature, quotes on walking in nature. It's amazing what you can find out there, that all at your fingertips. So, but there are some classic quotes. You have in your flash drive like this, a Word document, as I mentioned earlier, that says C-Words presentation quotes. I'm pretty sure that they're all in there. If they're not, then you've got them in slide presentations here too. But I would encourage you to consider, how can you sprinkle in some quotes in some of your presentations to begin, to end, to segue, because it really does add a higher level of quality to your presentation, and people, they'll remember that. Okay, so here's my friend and colleague Linda Bartlett, who's now retired, but with permission to use this picture. We have the idea of make a practice to send energy to the room beforehand. And some of you who do Reiki or healing touch or Qigong know about this. Those who don't, and there's probably some people in the audience here who don't know about this, this is the idea to basically put an intention out before you get to the classroom. And what I do is I ask for two things. One is that the audience is the most receptive to hear my message. And the second is that I am on message, as they say. I'm on target with a message. That, if you get that done, you're doing great. Anything else is gravy. I don't ask to make sure that the power stays on or that the room temperature is the right temperature or whatever else, because those are the things you can't control. But I ask that the audience be most receptive to my message and that I am on message. I'm the best messenger I can be that day. That's the idea behind this. We're going to do an exercise called the energy ball meditation, and that's the idea about using energy, and this is the whole idea of the energy field. So we'll come back to that one. Good teaching is like good acting. So I want to share with you a quote here. It goes like this: good teaching is like good acting. And the rest of the quote is, you got to know your lines and you got to know how to deliver them. One of my friends is an actor. You may have recognized his name. You may recognize his name. His name is Michael York. He was in Romeo and Juliet. He was in Logan's Run. He was in Three Musketeers. And of course, he's famous for being in Austin Powers movies. And one day we were talking, he says to me, he says, you have a much more difficult job acting than I do. And I said, how's that? I said, I don't really act. He said, oh, yes, you do. He said, I get to play different roles in the course of my career. You have the same role throughout your entire career, and that requires a lot more acting and a lot more better acting. I thought that's interesting. So when you go up on stage, then you are acting, whether you know it or not, you are acting. And that's why I say that, teach like your hair is on fire. So there's another quote I want to share with you. It says this: have you been teaching for 20 years or have you been teaching for 1 year 20 times? Big difference with that. And we want to actually not only evolve our teaching skills, but evolve our acting skills as well, so that we are really, really good. Now, I think I told you the whole idea about making mistakes, and I can't remember now, since I did this a couple days ago, if I mentioned the story or not, but it's very likely that you're going to make mistakes when you teach. It happens to everybody. And so the best we can do is just laugh with it and go on. Two of my favorite stories about making mistakes was the first one is by Yo-Yo Ma. I heard him interviewed with Terry Gross on Fresh Air, and Yo-Yo Ma was asked, do you ever make mistakes in a performance? And he said, all the time. And Terry Gross said, you do? And he says, every time. And she goes, really? And he says, yeah. He goes, I just pray I do it early on and get done with it so I can move on because I know it's going to happen. And I thought, wow, Yo-Yo Ma making mistakes. If he can do it, then the rest of us can do it. And then I went to go see the Beach Boys at Red Rocks a couple of years ago. And Brian Wilson was back with the Beach Boys. Now, he had not been with them for like about 40 years. So he came back with the Beach Boys on this one tour. And I wanted to go see him because, you know, that's like Paul McCartney. You want to see these guys before they die. And he sits down on the piano and begins to play a song. And at about a minute into it, he stops. And he goes, oh, I made a mistake. Let me start over again. I'm thinking, this is Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. If he can make a mistake, you can make a mistake. And so the idea is you just acknowledge it, you laugh, and you move on. And that's also part of teaching too. Like the show must go on. But you want to do it with grace and dignity and not with stress. That's the most important thing I can tell you right now. So have you been teaching for 20 years? Have you been coaching for 20 years or 1 year, 20 times? That's the question we want to ask ourselves. This says, use the backdoor approach when teaching. Now, time for a story. So if someone told me back when I was in undergraduate school that I would be speaking at various places like Johns Hopkins and the White House and John Deere on the topic of human spirituality, I would have thought, what kind of drugs are you taking? But I began my career with the idea to include human spirituality into wellness. And it definitely plays a role in terms of stress management, as you will see. And so what I discovered is that the front door may be closed, but the back door is always open. And so time for another story here. And I don't say this to impress you because it's not impressive, but I was asked to speak at the White House several times, I think about 5 times in total. And it turns out that I think the 4th time they said, would you come in to give a talk on human spirituality? This is during the Bill Clinton era, I might add. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll be glad to. Well, the day I'm supposed to be there, they call me up in the morning. They say, listen, we want you to speak, but you can't use the word spirituality. The Washington Post is caught on and we can't have you doing that. And I said, okay. And they said, can you do your talk without using the word spirituality? And I said, sure, I can. So when I was there, I talked about inspiration. I talked about relationships, values, and purpose in life. I talked about the health of the human spirit. And I never once used the word spirituality. You can do it. The back door is always open. And it turns out that when I got done, this woman came up to me and she said, my husband died 3 days ago. This is my first day back at work. She goes, I really needed to hear your message. And luckily, she said that right next to the guy who brought me in. So we knew it was a home run. Well, I want to tell you right now that it's very important to include what you want to include in your topic. And if the back door, if the front door is closed, the back door is always open. This will make more sense as we go through these presentations and you hear the content. But also, when it comes time for you to ask me questions in our Zoom classroom session, I want you to come back to this and ask me if this is something that I can help you with. I'll be glad to do that. Or if it doesn't make sense, ask me that because I'll be glad to help you. There probably are some more examples. Right now, I can't think of any, but spirituality is definitely the one that is the biggest example to use. This one says, use a variety of teaching styles. So, okay, so there are the military wives I'm speaking to out in Hawaii. And you can see, you've seen that slide before, stress management for the military spouses. Ta-da, there it is. So again, remember I mentioned to you that people have different learning styles? Well, if they've got different learning styles, we as instructors, as presenters, as coaches, as counselors, we have to have different teaching styles to share the information because not everyone's going to get it the same way. So in terms of this, yeah, slides are great, but I don't use a slide. Sometimes I'll use a flip chart. Sometimes I'll use a small group discussion. Sometimes I'll use pairs. We're going to do an exercise with creativity, and I hold this up now because you'll be seeing this again later. But the idea is that we're going to be doing all kinds of things, and people learn in different ways. So I want you to vary your style of teaching in the course of what you do so that you're not just doing the same thing all the time. It is so 20th century for someone to be up on stage talking the whole time. That is so 20th century. We're in a different mindset right now. So I want you to think to yourself, again, with multiple intelligence, how can you begin to have a variety with your teaching styles and skills to answer the people who have different learning styles? Here are some examples. This is a picture of me, and it looks like I'm kind of demonic here. Sorry about that. But let's see if you're paying attention. So there's PowerPoint slides or Keynote. Apple's version is called Keynote. Flip chart, question and answers. I've done that with I think I told you I spoke to a bunch of people from, it was supposed to be a bunch of teachers and principals. It was a grounds crew. We did a flip chart with that. Small group discussions, pair exercises, really good way to try and teach something. Experiential skills. A large part of stress management is experiential skills with like diaphragmatic breathing, with progressive muscular relaxation, with music therapy, with yoga, with Tai Chi. This is all experiential. And you get the idea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to begin to think to yourself, how can you begin to vary and be more inclusive with your teaching skills? This next one says, establish a safe and friendly class environment for learning. And if you do nothing else, this is so important because people are coming to hear you and they're admitting a sense of vulnerability, which, by the way, is great or a message to talk about Brene Brown, but we'll get to her later. So in terms of this, if they are showing vulnerability, the last thing you want to do is capitalize on their vulnerability. You want to make sure that your classroom, your coaching session is in a safe, friendly environment. So on page 280 of your workbook, I have a list of things here. And for, I know this is kind of boring, but I'm going to read through these so that we're all on the same page. And think of safe, friendly class environments as through the 5 senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. So number 1 says, consider sending energy to the room before your presentation. We talked about this already, but the idea of the intention, we could call it a prayer, but the intention that A, people are receptive to hear your message, and B, you're on message so that you don't wander and become a stress ball and not do a good job teaching. Number 2, consider playing some soft background music, okay, the sense of sound. When I do workshops, I'll often have music playing in the breaks so that we have a nice segue into relaxation before we get to the next thing there. So whether it's, used to be cassette tapes, then it got to be CDs, now it's podcast, fill in the blank, nice sense of relaxing music. This will come in handy when we talk about music therapy. Number 3 says, place the chairs in a circle whenever possible. So you can't see it, but in this context, we are all sitting in a circle as you hear this. And this is the power of a circle. They call this a sacred circle. The idea is that everybody has an equal contribution to make to this. But it also speaks to, as we're going to get to in the next presentation, the idea that a circle is a symbol of wholeness, and as we all come together, we are parts of that whole. So I don't always have the luxury to put the chairs in a circle. If they're nailed to the floor, I leave them where they are, obviously. But if I can, I will move the chairs into a circle. Sometimes it may be an oval, kind of go with the size of the room. You get the idea. Number 4, have an icebreaker for talks that are longer than 2 hours. Because when people are sharing, you want to make sure they have a sense of comfort with who they're sharing with. If your presentation is less than 2 hours, if you're doing one-on-ones, obviously an icebreaker is not appropriate. You get the idea. Again, adapt what we talk about here for where you're going to be. If your presentation is longer than 2 hours, I think a icebreaker is a great idea. We'll give you some examples in a second. Number 5 says establish healthy boundaries. Boy, healthy boundaries is the name of the game in this day and age right now. But in this case here, healthy boundaries says request that everybody turn off their cell phones. If they're going to be doing relaxation, then you don't want cell phones going off or vibrating so that everybody can hear it. If somebody's life is that chaotic that they say, I can't take my cell phone and turn it off, then probably it's best to ask them to leave. And you've probably heard all the examples now. Everyone's got their own style. Some people say put them all in a basket and you'll get them when we leave here. I would say just have everyone turn them off, and that includes vibrations too. Number 6 is whenever possible, consider lowering the lights for relaxation techniques. If the people are lying down on the floor, and we will be doing some of that in the course of our time together, having lights that are on overhead that are real bright can kind of negate that. So if you can, some places it's all or nothing. Lights are on or off. Where if that's the case, I have gotten the habit of bringing a lamp with me where I can actually have a 60 watt bulb rather than 40, 100 watt bulbs or whatever the case might be there. Number 7 says, thank each person for sharing when they open up. And again, if they're feeling vulnerable, and they may not say I'm feeling vulnerable, but the fact that they're there, they're demonstrating that. Thank them for sharing, because they don't have to do that. And you want people to share if they feel comfortable. Now, if some people kind of share too much or always dominate, then say, let's give somebody else a turn. Okay, so feel free to know how to control the classroom like that. Number 8 says, consider small group activities to foster a sense of trust with the group. And in this case here, having like groups of 3 or 4, you're going to see we're going to do that, or I'm going to suggest that for some of the lesson plans for creative problem solving, for humor, for the art of calm. Then that's what we do. Sometimes we do pairs, so that's really good there. Consider placing a sign on the door outside that says, we're doing some relaxation. Please do not enter. Again, healthy boundaries. Number 10 says small hints of aromatherapy. And I would say a hint of a hint. You don't want something where someone says, oh my God, I can't breathe because of the peppermint. You want people to say, do I smell something? Like, they're not quite sure, but it makes them feel really good. So lavender works. Sometimes mint works. Some of the people in this audience have better handles on aromatherapy than I do. So I'll let you go with that. Number 11 says, relaxation techniques are best learned laying on the flat ground. That's where they're best learned, okay? Where they're gonna be practiced is a whole different story. But so I suggest pillows and blankets. And so in a in-person workshop, the second day we do pillows and blankets, we do it the third day and the fourth day. So when it comes time for that particular lesson plan we have here, keep that in mind. So a general rule of thumb is to work the 5 senses, okay? So when you get ready to do your presentation, ask yourself, do I have the ambience as a safe place? And the answer, hopefully, is yes. This is one of my favorite lines. It says, education may be therapy, but, and the but is not the same thing as counseling. Know your boundaries. I've seen people at other conferences and workshops where when they break, people will come up and ask questions, and they'll say, well, here's my business card, make an appointment to see me and I'll be glad to take care of that. And I'm thinking, that's inappropriate. As a teacher, as an instructor, as a facilitator, that's the hat we're wearing. Okay, you may be a therapist, you may be a counselor, you may be a coach. If you are, then you're in a different category. The rest of us mere mortals, that's why we refer out. That's why in your homework, I want you to have a reference list of therapists, of counselors, of people who do art therapy, people who do yoga, people who do this and that. If you're using your public speaking as a recruiting tool for business, you're probably doing it for the wrong reason, okay? So know your boundaries, especially when it comes time for counseling, unless you are a counselor, and some of the people in the audience are. So again, you're wearing a different hat, don't worry about that. Let me go back for a second, just add one more thought. I will tell you this, education is therapy. You may not realize what you're doing, but by sharing insight information, the light bulb goes off. That does help a lot of people. But we do not call ourselves therapists. We teach art therapy, we may teach music therapy, we are not therapists, we are educators. And as long as you know what hat you're wearing, you're gonna be fine. This one says, get in the habit of starting with some icebreakers. There we're actually doing an exercise for relaxation. In your workbook here, there's a couple of pages on icebreakers. One of my favorites goes like this. If you've got more than 30 people in the room, ask people to stand up and then go around the room, meeting people, shaking hands, saying, hi, my name is, and then share their birthday. The statistical odds of 2 people having the same day and month in a group of 30 is 100%, 30 or more. And if you're looking for that, then you'll know it at the end of the match because they start screaming, saying, "Ah, same birthday." Okay, so that's a real quick one you can use. We go around the room saying our names. We'll do that when we do the first uh, Zoom talk there. You get the idea about that. So it's always nice to do introductions, some icebreakers, and there's books on this, but just so you know that there's all kinds of ways you can do this. One of the newest things I've done in my workshops is I've gotten out to a company called Liberty Puzzles. They make these puzzle pieces, and you'll see, I'll try and show you some examples when we do the Zoom classes. But I put the puzzles on tables around the room that we're in, and during the break, people will go up and start working on puzzles. And I'll tell you, people love it, especially Liberty puzzles because they're really challenging. They're really small. You can find like one about this big, and it has like 100 pieces, and it takes 3 days. But people love puzzles, and it's a great way to do some bonding, which is what this is all about. So anyway, I'll send you a link. We're going to start a list of things I'm going to send you after this is all said and done, and that's in there. Here's my friend Linda again with the Energizer Bunny, but she says, and I say this too, make sure everyone's on the same page. So when you get done explaining a concept, then ask, is everyone with me on this? It's important to read body language to see if people are tuned in or if they're zoned out. And if they're not on message with what you're saying, then come back around until they are. Okay, so we don't want to lose anybody, especially with some of these skills, to make sure that they're on board with this. Number 39, when participants share thoughts or feelings, be sure to thank them. Okay, that goes back to the idea of the comfortable class setting. But again, when people feel vulnerable, if they do decide to open up and share, then you want to thank them. And it's a cliche now to say thank you for sharing. Please word that differently, because you don't want to come across like you're just repeating cliches. But say, gee, that's really helpful. It really helped me to hear you say that. Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate that. Does anybody else have something they want to share? So be sure to thank them for that, acknowledge them, and I think you'll see that you get more sharing with that too. Number 40, and all of these, by the way, are in no sense of importance. This one is equally as important as the rest of them. But this one says, consider making a creativity notebook to capture great teaching ideas. So I mentioned to you the humor notebook, the tickler notebook. I also have a creativity notebook where I'll put in there poems and quotes and things I think, can I actually use this in my class? Like, I walked into Liberty Puzzles to buy a puzzle, and I saw these things here, and I thought to myself, I can do a whole journal theme on this. So I grabbed a couple, and voila, there we go. What do you have in terms of a creativity notebook? Again, just an idea that you can throw ideas in, see if that helps any. One thing someone told me is that we have a Facebook page for alumni for this group. I think I may have already mentioned this to you, but if I haven't, here it goes. One of your alumni made a page for me. It's called Seawards, Students, and Beyond. Sounds like Bed Bath & Beyond. But what it is and what it's become is a way for us to share and kind of come together ideas. And so a lot of people have said, this is my creativity notebook. I'm getting all kinds of ideas here that I can use for my presentation. So I'll put up articles and links. People will put up cartoons. Some people will ask opinions about something. Some people will say, hey, I tried this, didn't work. Does someone have a better idea? So that itself has become a creativity notebook as well. And our last but not least would be you. Do you have any other ideas? When it comes time for our in-class Zoom class, I'm going to ask you, do you guys have any other teaching tips? Because I do not have a monopoly on how to teach stress management. I'm just an N of one, lots of experience, a lot of things have worked, a lot of things haven't. So I'm hoping that when we go around the room here, and we will do that after we do introductions, see if you have something you'd like to share with the group, something that has worked for you that you'd like to share with the group as well, which I think would be a wonderful idea to have. I do have one more thing for you, and that is this. If you do a type of workshop that goes like all day or whatever, or even like for an hour, because I'll do some experiential stuff in an hour-long presentation, you want to have a means to call people back. And so I have one of these things. And when you tap that and put it into the mic, it gets people's attention. I used to have this in better working order. These are Tibetan bells. rope broke, so I got to get it fixed. But you want some means to get people to come back, especially if you have people go into small groups or pairs. You want them to come back so you can get their attention again. So that's another teaching tip about that. And at some point here, I'm going to joke and say teaching tip number 843, because there's lots of them. This is just the top ones that came to mind in the course of this workshop here. And so here's where I would ask you a question, and I will ask this when it comes time for our Zoom class. Did this help you at all? Does this help you at all in terms of your own teaching ability or your coaching ability? Did you get some ideas, and can you use some of these? Again, I'm going to suggest take what you like, leave the rest, adapt what you can, because some of the things I said, you may say, I can't use that, but I can definitely use it like this. And that brings up another point I want to share with you. When I first spoke to the military did this workshop for the military, actually, I had about 300 people in the room. It was a 2-day workshop. We kind of condensed this down to 2 days. We couldn't do things like art therapy, but imagine this. You're teaching a workshop like this with everybody in uniforms. And it's a bit intimidating for someone like me who's not been in the military. And I thought to myself, I know what they're going to say. Every time I come up with an idea about teaching stress, they're going to say, we can't do that. Because I've heard that before from people saying to me, be careful how you share ideas, because there's a lot of things we can't do. And you're pretty liberal with your ideas, C-word. So I began my presentation by saying, I'm going to share with you a lot of things that are used in the ideas of mental health. I don't want to hear anybody in this room tell me you can't do them. I want to hear you say, how can I adapt this to use this? And I saw people just go, wow, like I had them at hello. So again, the same thing. I don't want to hear you say, I can't do that. No, I coach, I can't do that. I want to hear you say, I coach, how can I use this? Or I do counseling, how can I use this? This is a wealth of ideas you're going to see for tools in the toolbox for your career, for your means to make the world a better place. So with that, I'll kind of close things down, but I've got a few more things I want to show you because I forgot to bring them before. But remember I told you when you have your antenna up for things, how you can share things with your students, with your clients and stuff. So I'm at a trade show, and I walk around and I see this. And this is actually a mandala. It's the labyrinth. But basically what you do is you can't walk this, but you can use your finger. So use your finger to kind of go through and use it as a meditation device. And this actually has information on how you can order it. I'll include this in the thing I send you. But some people who say, I can't meditate, but then they hold this and they're like, wow, this is impressive. I actually have one that's about just the size of the inside thing. And you do it with a toothpick because it's a travel size one. Anyways, that's that. Then in Colorado, maybe where you live, we have Renaissance festivals. So I went to this Renaissance festival, and a woman there had a booth where she sold these. These are, I'll hold them up closer so you can see them. These are mandalas. And my first thought was, oh my God, this is great. This is a meditation device, because she gives you like a chopstick, and you go ahead and begin to trace around here. And she's done an incredible job with these things here. And I'll give you the information on how to order these too. I'll give you her website. But for a workshop, rather than actually everyone just sitting there with their eyes closed doing a lotus meditation, everyone got one of these and a chopstick, and we did this. And what I suggested was everyone write down a problem that you have, and then as you do this, just let your mind wander. And when you get done with it, let's come up with 3 solutions to your problem. I had people say that was the best exercise they've ever done. So my antenna is up wherever I go, looking for props, for tools, for things that people can use as a means to unlock their heart and their mind to get to a place of inner peace. That's what it all comes down to. So somebody in a workshop once said to me, can you give us some of your tips for how not to do things? And I thought, that's what this whole presentation has been so far. The things that I did that didn't work, I've told you. And the things that worked, I've told you. So this is actually not a comprehensive list. You may hear more things kind of spill out in the next couple of days as we go through these presentation links. But I'm hoping that you can take, again, what you like and use it any way you possibly can.